Next, we have contestant number 9, Joseph Ben David. Judges number 9.
I had the good fortune being the president of the Humanist Society of Greater New York. At that time, the vice president was Eva Ingersoll Wakefield, the granddaughter of the great Colonel. She became a close friend of mine, and she gave me this book, which is now 110 years old. Speeches from which I will quote. And she told me, you know, his enemies were portraying him as the little dirty atheist. But what he actually was an uncompromising defender of truth, justice, and liberty. And now, I'm going to quote from this. He was not a firebrand. If you ever heard his actual voice, which I did, it was soothing, penetrating, and highly rational. And now, on the spiritual. If there is an abused word in our language, it is spirituality. The spiritual denounced the world. They were so spiritual that they invented instruments of torture. They founded the Inquisition, appealed to the whip, the rack, and the sword. They tore the flesh of their fellow men with hooks of iron, buried their neighbors alive, cut off their eyelids, dashed out the brains of babes, and cut off the breasts of mothers. John Calvin was intensely spiritual when he warmed his fleshless hands at the flames that consumed Servetus. These lovers of God, these haters of man, even in our time and country, retain the aroma, the odor, the smell of the spiritual. The spiritual man lives to his ideal. He endeavors to make others happy. He is the friend and champion of the oppressed, the poor, and the suffering. He enjoys the beautiful in the presence of the highest creation of art. His eyes are suffused with tears. When he listens to the great melodies, the divine harmonies, he feels the sorrow and raptures of death and love. He is intensely human. Spirituality is all of this world. The spiritually minded man is a poet. If he doesn't write poetry, he lives it. Spirituality is the perfect health of the soul. It is noble, manly, generous, brave, free-spoken, natural, superb. Nothing is more sickening than the spiritual wine, the pretense that crawls at first and talks about humility and then suddenly becomes arrogant and says, I am spiritual. You subdue the earth and dig for gold. You have the theaters, your operas, and all the luxuries of life. But I, beggar that I am, Pharisee that I am your superior because I am spiritual. And now, on science and sentiment. He meant feeling, sentiment. It was thought at one time by many that science would do away with poetry, that it was the enemy of imagination. We know now that this is not true. We know that science goes hand in hand with imagination. We know that it is in the highest degree poetic, and that the old ideas, once considered so beautiful, are flat and stale. The more we know, the more beauty, the more poetry we find. A person will be attracted to another for 1,000 reasons, and why a person is attracted to another will depend upon the intellectual, artistic, and ethical development of each. Men are influenced according to their capacity, their temperament, and their knowledge. Now educate such men, develop their brains, enlarge their intellectual horizon, teach them something of the laws of health, and then they may fall in love with women because they are developed grandly in body and mind. The sentiment is still there, still controls, but back of the sentiment is science. Sentiment can never be destroyed, and love will forever rule the human race. Science will destroy superstition. It will not injure true religion. Science is the foundation of real religion. Science teaches us the consequences of actions, the rights and duties of all. Without science, there can be no religion. Even if I should get to heaven and have a harp, I know that I could not bear to see my descendants still on the earth, diseased, deformed, crazed, and suffering. That let us have more science and more sentiment, more knowledge and more conscience, more liberty and more love.